Well, I'm interested in how you became who you are today. So I want to start at the beginning, and I'm going to ask a question based on the lack of knowledge. Are you the son of scientists? Are you the son of people interested in mathematics, or did you come out of nowhere in regard to your subject?
So I grew up in Schenectady, New York. I was born there, the Ellis Hospital, May 6, 1947. Mm-hmm. And my mother was a homemaker. My dad was a electrical engineer, worked in the Navy on radar, and worked at GE Research Lab. Schenectady, as you may know, was a town established by GE for a lot of production turbines and things like that too. But my dad worked at the research lab, which was and still is there. And he was very interested in the new things, computers, as well as a lot of the radar and other things that he worked on.
So you didn't spring from nowhere intellectually. There was this in the household?
There was already in the household. There was an interest in science and technology.
Were you an only child?
I was the oldest of four.
Oldest of four. Are you the only one whose career went somewhat in the direction of your father's?
So no, I've got a brother. So going down top, I'm the oldest.
Yeah.
Then my brother is a retired marine biology professor.
Oh.
My sister worked in pharmacology.
Oh.
And my youngest sister is now a physical therapist in Seattle. So,
So should I imagine a household strewn with books on engineering and science, or actually he didn't bring it home, his particular interest?
There were a lot of toys and various things, educational things. I remember the World Book Encyclopedia, which we all looked at there, and having a number of electronic gadgets and toys and so on too. So it was I remember my mother, although she was not a technologist, was always asking questions. So she was very, very curious. I think she got us in the mode of, always questioning.
Were there, at whatever age you might have felt it, specific ambitions for the children, or are you pretty well allowed to follow your interests?
I think we followed our interests pretty much. There was no expectation that you'd be a doctor or a lawyer or a technologist or whatever. In fact, when I was an undergraduate, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was using the undergraduate program as it was intended to explore different options.
Well, we already see one expectation for you, and that is that you go to college.
Yes.
So that at least was in the air.
Yes, yeah. And both of my parents grew up on farms in Michigan, and my dad almost didn't go to college, but was encouraged by his math teacher to do so. And my mom went to college.
Well, you've introduced the subject of encouragement by teachers. So I want you in school, let's say at 11. What's the school like?
Grade.
What's the preparation?
So 11 would have been sixth grade.
Sixth grade.
Something like that. So sixth grade, we had some excellent teachers. I remember a biology professor there that was very, very good, and he would come around with lab work and so on.
You remember his name?
No.
No.
No, Mr. Place, I think Mr. Place was his name.
It was nice to honor them.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the teachers were very good. Niskayuna had an astounding school system, and I'm always meeting people from Niskayuna who have done well in their lives because the teachers have been.
Let's talk about that. So it's a suburb of Schenectady.
It's a suburb of Schenectady. It's near the research lab, and it had many PhDs among the faculty, which is unusual for a high school and a school system. Yeah. It was.
High school is now in the 50s.
High school's 50s, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yes. And is this a time when a lot of them are not able to get jobs in universities, or is it just the habit of the system? Yeah, you weren't in that position.
I wouldn't know to ask. I didn't.
I find since I went to high school, public high school in the 50s, although in California, that I was educated by a lot of very intelligent women.
Yeah.
Who, as women, could not get other jobs in the fields that interested them.
That may have also been the case. I just didn't know what their personal situation was.
Yeah. Fair enough. Let's get you to middle school, junior high. I'm tracking the point of a particular spark. It may not even happen through high school, but are you getting?
So middle school, junior high school, it was 7th grade, 6, 7, 8, or whatever. We're terrible, I think, as they are for many kids who are going through puberty or whatever.
Right.
Everybody's misbehaving. So it was nothing particularly memorable.
A lost period.
A lost period, right? You're just growing up and nothing else is happening.
Right.
I do remember learning a little algebra then, but that was about it in terms of.
So now I'm going to put you in high school. Are you any more mature in your intellectual development?
High school was much more interesting. It was a larger community. It was much more technically oriented. It was a very good high school. Teachers were excellent. I remember some of the teachers teaching writing, teaching mathematics, teaching science. It was a great experience just to go to high school there.
Are you an extraordinary student or just a good one?
I'm a good student. I'm pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah, so I
I
remember being elected as treasurer of the class because I was so good at math, right? Whatever.
Okay.
So
I'm glad it's practical already in your life.
it wasn't calculus or anything, but it was, whatever.
If you're in an American high school in the 50s, you're getting counseling as to where to go for university. What is that discussion like?
I don't remember much of that. I didn't apply very many places.
You didn't?
I probably remember being courted by Michigan State, which is where my dad had gone to, because I was a national merit finalist, and they were trying to attract national merit finalists there. And I ended up going to Yale for liberal education, which I think was a good choice in the end.
Yale's not a bad choice in most cases, but one doesn't, even in the 50s, I mean, competition every decade has gotten more and more crazy, but even in the 50s, you didn't just waltz into Yale. So your grades must have been pretty good.
I had good grades. I had like perfect scores on the SATs and things like that. So it was
perfect scores on the SATs, it's some indicator of something.
So I was doing well in academically.
And you were doing well verbally as well as mathematically, both sides of the SATs.
Both sides, yeah. I enjoyed the writing side of things as well. Yeah. So
that wasn't so usual in the day. Okay, Yale bids for you, tries to interest you, or you just?
I think I just went through the standard application process and was accepted. They have an interview process where there's some alum in the local tech community interviews you and sees if you would be a good fit. So.
Okay, the nice thing about undergraduate life in America is that the first year you don't have to choose a major yet. You're tasting the waters. You're traveling the waters of. Tell me how you are beginning to make decisions about your future.
So the nice thing about a school like Yale is it's a liberal school, a broad spectrum of possible career paths and interests you could take. And so I was trying to decide. I didn't know whether I wanted to be a technologist or maybe a lawyer or maybe a psychologist or something else.
Right.
Lots of things.
What you're supposed to be wondering.
And I enjoyed taking classes on film, and other things. So it was a good liberal education. Right. And I drifted in the end towards mathematics, in part because the mathematics curriculum was the least demanding, and I could explore all these other interests at the same time. So I took some classes. I didn't.
Least demanding to the talented, obviously.
It was,
But you mean just in terms of
the course requirements?
The course requirements.
So the course requirements were.
I'm searching for the first sign of a mentor or a particularly inspiring figure. Will I find him or her in the mathematics department at Yale?
No, actually, economics. There was a professor there by the name of Richard Ruggles who hired me to work on computer programming for the Econometric Society. And so I did that several summers, working on price indices for Latin America and submitting decks of punch cards to be run through the IBM 7090 or whatever it was we had then to compute price indices. And so it was technical programming work, which I enjoyed and got me more familiar with computers.
Many of the people watching this won't even be able to imagine the state of computer life at the time that you were an undergraduate at Yale in terms of what was available, what was being thought about it. Can you remember?
Computing didn't exist as a major then, so I didn't have that as a choice. If there had been a computer science major, then I probably would have majored.
Would have done it.
There wasn't engineering when I took some of the CS courses that were in the engineering program. Computers were just starting to become part of the curriculum. There's a couple of courses in programming that I took. Mostly they were punch card based.
Right.
Punch cards are hard to find these days. My wife, who does teaching these days, was looking for a deck of punch cards to show her kids, fourth graders today, what a punch card was. And, just can't find them.
You can't find them.
It's hard to find. So they're around. But
is there a great computer museum in Boston?
There is a museum. They probably have some there, but she was looking for some to bring into class.
That they could actually play with.
But and there was also even a machine with paper tape, which you don't see anymore at all. So the IBM.
So should I not be romantic and imagine you begin to have access to computers in this form? It interests you, but there's not yet a eureka or something about your sensing the future?
It was something I was drifting into, I think, because it was fun, it was interesting. computers certainly had a power that you didn't see in other technologies as directly and immediately. You could submit something and get results back. And it related to the mathematics I was doing. But there wasn't any, I don't remember any particular moment, and that's an interesting question, but of any particular moment said, yes, I want to be a computer scientist. Although I did drift into applying for computer science graduate school, which I must have made the decision.
Something,
but
exactly.
Actually, if you ask me when did I decide that that's what I wanted to do, I actually don't remember crossing that threshold. It just sort of drifted into I'm doing more and more computer science. This looks like an interesting discipline. Why don't I go try it?
You wind up going to Stanford, and we'll talk about that, obviously. But I'm wondering roughly how long Stanford has even had a PhD program in computers.
Stanford had just started a PhD program.
Just started.
Right? So I finished Yale in '69.
Yes.
I think Stanford started its program in '65 or something like that. So it just had been a few years. There have been a few PhDs out.
You just sound to me less clueless than you're about what your future is going to be, because it's a fairly bold decision. I mean, the other would have been to go to in mathematics. Yes.
Well, it was partly tech field. It was partly things like, let's go live in California for a while too.
Okay, that
grew
always
up in
comes into it.
So that's part of it. So Stanford should be interested. So.
Stanford at that point, as you say, just started the PhD program in '65. What other, do you remember programs are there around? Because you may have applied to other programs, or maybe Stanford was one of the only ones to exist.
So at that time, I think I applied to MIT as well and did not get in. So it was
it's a good lesson for people to know.
Yeah, and I think I applied a couple other places, but I don't remember.
MIT, unfortunately, has winter. If you had gotten into both MIT and Stanford, where would you have gone?
Probably Stanford.
Anyway.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
So you're in Stanford. What is the guidance, such as a PhD student gets, to you as you arrive in terms of this new field? At least field.
So they're establishing the curriculum there.
Right.
They're putting together courses. I got to meet the faculty. Bob Floyd was my thesis advisor. He taught a marvelous class on algorithms. Don Knuth was there. Zohar Mana, many other people were just a fantastic group of faculty. And so part of it was the coursework and taking the wonderful courses they were teaching. And part of it was trying to integrate into research and figure out what kind of a research program you wanted to do. And there was also at the time, just to set the context, there was also the Vietnam War. And so I was worried about the draft and trying to figure out what my life might be like should that become a concern. I did end up working at the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory up in the hills behind Stanford. It's no longer part of Stanford campus, or at least not part of the teaching campus anyway. And we had, I remember there was a cart there, I think it's the Computer Museum now, where they were trying to talk about autonomous vehicles. This was one of the very first, the Stanford cart trying to drive around the parking lot and not hit any of the cars. And so I was working on some of the coding for that, which allowed me to get a deferment for a while anyway on the Vietnam War situation.
I'm very interested in and I've asked others this, the formation of a community interested in questions. Obviously, Berkeley is across the bay. Are you sensing, as a graduate student, a larger discussion going on?
There's some of that, yeah. There was, for example, one of the early papers that I worked on was a fast median finding algorithm. So given a set of numbers, how do you find the median of that? Yes. And that was sparked by some insights that Manny Blum had. Manny's at Berkeley, and he connected with Bob Floyd, and then some of the graduate students, Von Pratt, Bob Tarjan, and myself got involved as well. And so that
there is a larger intellectual community.
Beginning of a community there, yeah. As another example, Don Knuth used to run, was it weekly or monthly? It was fairly often, sessions at his house where he would invite speakers in. And so I remember Dick Harp coming down from Berkeley talking about NP completeness and so on too. So there was a community. It was starting to, it was a bit of a distance, but people would come back and forth. And I remember going up to Berkeley once to talk with some of the researchers there. So there was some back and forth between Stanford and Berkeley. But computer science was still very small. There was no industry like we have now.
Which had its advantages.
Yes.
Because you could talk to everyone.
Yeah.
at that point.
Yes, yeah.
Again, you're doing graduate work. You're a man who likes to talk about ideas. Give me some insight into how you're beginning to think in terms of the direction to go. And maybe the opportunities are not vast, or maybe they are, but how do we get you, well, let's just say to your dissertation. So
my dissertation, the research I did ended up focusing on algorithms, and I was interested in sort of the combinatorics, the algorithmic content of algorithms, how to get computers to do complicated things. There, and I was interested in search algorithms. Remember also, to bring up a side direction,
please.
Part of my thesis was on search algorithms, and I remember being concerned at the time about the ethical implications of this. If we make search so much more efficient, what about surveillance, and what could the government do with this, and so on too. And we see all this resonating today with both the government and Google and other companies.
And actually throughout your career.
Yeah.
And we will talk more about the ethical issue, because I think you have clearly early demonstrated an interest in the ethical implications.
Yeah.
Interesting to me that it happened so early in the process. Are you speculating at all? This may be a classic retrospective question, where we now know what's happening at that time, but at the time you may not have known about the future of this, not field only, but effect on society of these.
Perhaps it's hard to tell. I mean, with hindsight, you can say anything. But
But you don't particularly remember feeling you were now rushing toward the future, in a way.
Perhaps one way of setting context is to say that I'm a big fan of science fiction as well.
Okay.
And so, imagining what the future could be like, including the future of computers. Asimov and Heinlein were big then, other writers now. But trying to speculate as to where the field might be going as a society or technologically has certainly always been a part of what I do, and so I think that's part of the, if you will, the culture in which you're operating professionally. Do you have any? Yes, I think that's true too. I mean, I think the AI theme, which has always been a part of what I do too, although not as strong as perhaps some of the other themes, but it's can you build an intelligent computer? Yes. Well, it was an issue that arose certainly in graduate school, and people were thinking about those things, and throughout my career, then I bounced back and forth thinking about these things off and on. But the larger implications of what computer science might have as an impact on society, what can you do with computers, is one of the big questions still of the day. Right.
With attendant fears and hopes.
Yes. Exactly.
Are you at this point? I'm also interested in the relationship between mathematics and computer theory, but not in its formal aspects, although I'm interested if you want to talk about that, as in the position somebody who had a lapsed mathematician, although of course mathematics is in computer theory, choosing this field, whether this was considered odd, or you had gone bad, or you weren't worthy of mathematical theory. I mean,
no, I think it's not like that at all. I think there was a blending of these fields. When I was at Stanford, Don Knuth was growing his group of researchers there, and two of the people in particular that I ended up spending a lot of time with were David Klarner, who was a professor of combinatorics, and Vasek Shvatal, who was also similarly working in combinatorics. And they taught courses which related to the combinatorics of algorithms and graphs and so on, but also talked to the algorithmic side of things as well. So I worked with them. So I think we saw a blending of these fields more than any kind of looking askance one way or the other.
In a way that leads me to the opposite question. Why did computer theory break off into its own program? Why didn't it stay within the mathematics?
So computer theory is, in fact, at different places it's different things. I mean, when I came to MIT here, there was an effort at one point on the part of the mathematics department to take the theory group out of computer science and move it into mathematics. We declined that invitation, but it was an interesting one. And nonetheless, even so, right now at MIT in computer science theory, we live within the CSAIL laboratory, which is interdepartmental and has mathematicians and computer scientists both in it, and we work side by side all the time. So it's clearly computer science theory is a field that spans both computer science and mathematics,
Right.
and people are happy with that back and forth and that blending.
You've already gotten yourself to MIT, but that's fair enough. The PhD is well received.
Yeah, I mean, I think a PhD is a demonstration that you've done some research, and
Right.
So that was.
But
it wasn't a breakthrough in the sense.
it wasn't a breakthrough. Okay,
Didn't cause any waves, really.
Good to know, because the stages of a career are very interesting too.
Yeah, I think at the time it was probably badly written too. I think I've learned to write better since then. So,
Even though you were not a bad writer as an undergraduate.
well, I think technical writing is hard. It's challenging.
Okay, why?
You have to put your head in the mind of the reader first of all, and you have to be very clear about the terms you're using and that they're all well defined, and that that you're building the structure right. The usual challenge of writing is trying to communicate the complicated structure to an audience that
Right.
doesn't know any of that to begin with.
The goal is not lyricism. The goal is explanation.
That's right. Although, lyricism in the sense of conciseness and elegance play a role in computer science, but not poetry or anything like that.
I'm very struck. This is really just a question. We don't have to belabor it, but just the use of words that are aesthetic words that mathematicians and computer theorists, which are a version of the same, use. Elegance, of course, and on and on. There is an active use of that language.
Absolutely, yeah. No, the simplicity and trying to come up with theorems that are cleanly stated and simple to understand really matters in the field. You can come up with very complicated structures and things that are true but interesting, but they're just too complicated to bend your head around. And so people look for the simplicity.
Right. Well, you haven't yet set the world on fire, but you're not doing badly. You get your PhD. What do you do next?
So after the PhD, it was interesting. The PhD program at Stanford had people from all over the world, including a number of Frenchmen. And so Gilles Kahn and Jean Villemin were two of the French colleagues I had there. And they said, Ron, why don't you come do a postdoc in France afterwards? And I said, that sounds marvelous. I love to travel. I'd taken French in high school, and I knew some French, and I figured I could get along. And so I accepted, and we went there for a year. Lived in Paris. This is at INRIA, Institut National de Recherche d'Informatique et d'Automatique.
Right.
I still get the accent. My French is mostly gone. And so that was a postdoc working with Jean Villemin mostly on algorithms and so on too. It was an interesting challenge. One of the interesting aspects of it was that they hadn't told me when I was accepted that the working language would be French. So I went there all day. I was talking French all day and exhausted at night, and then coming home the next day working.
But your French was up to it.
It got to be up to it
Got to
eventually.
be up to it.
After 3 months.
We know the language. We know that you're having a marvelous time in Paris. But what is the quality of the inquiry there at that point?
So I think it was good. The French research lab was a first-rate research lab. People there were doing interesting work, largely theoretical. And the work I was doing with Jean Villemin was more combinatorial and algorithmic, but it was good stuff. So I was pleased with what we did there.
It was going to be a limited time there because you had to get on with your career. Yeah. How do you make that decision?
So it was clearly a one-year postdoc,
right.
And so towards the end of that year, I have to go around the U.S. So I took time off in the spring to travel all around Seattle and down to San Diego and Carnegie Mellon and MIT and everywhere.
Right.
Around just a big loop around the country trying to figure out what the opportunities were.
Right.
And I became persuaded that MIT was the place I should try a number of offers. But
MIT is its own argument for itself. But what about what they were doing at that point that might have...
So there was a good theory group here at MIT at the time. Albert Meyer was the person I had the main contact with. Mike Fisher was here at the time. A number of other faculty were here then. So it was clearly a place where a theoretician could come in and work happily. And I think things were exciting at the time. I mean, the P equals NP question had just started bubbling up in further ways, and people were wondering, could we resolve that? And there was questions of circuit complexity, and just algorithmic questions in general were of interest.
Of course, in the course of your career, which we'll get to as it develops, you wind up coming up with insights with colleagues and so forth, which we'll talk about, that have very profound practical applications. But the fellow who has just shown up at MIT is a theorist who is or isn't interested in the application of his ideas.
So MIT has a culture which is very much practice-oriented as well. So they
Okay.
like, when MIT likes theoreticians, but they also like to see people span the bracket. So there wasn't the practice theory gap. And so there was encouragement to do that, particularly in the teaching. Some of the introductory courses I helped teach were systems classes and things like this, so computer systems, not just the theory classes. So there was encouragement in those directions. I wasn't personally, in terms of the problems I was picking at that time, quite so oriented towards the practical stuff as I became later.
Yes.
But it's, in the end there was encouragement and motivation to think broadly, in part just to interact with your colleagues better.
Right.
In part because you want to have impact on society.
You've already made a decision, and it may be also the time, the era, but you'll tell me one way or the other, not even to consider going into industry. I mean, you sound like you are on an academic trajectory.
Yeah, pretty much. There were some research labs. I looked at Sandia Laboratories, for example, my big tour of the country. There wasn't the kind of industrial research labs there are now.
So really the kind of questions you were interested in asking, you would not have gone to there was no place.
And the computer industry didn't really exist at the time. The PC hadn't been invented yet.
What's the year that you come to MIT?
So I come to MIT in '74.
Okay.
Right. The PC wasn't going to happen for another 6 years anyway or something. So it was you talk about going to industry, there really wasn't an industry in any sense like there is now. It's just, many orders of magnitude different.
So no tortured decision making. This was a clear path.
Yeah, academia. And I had done teaching at Stanford. I taught summer courses. I'd been a teaching assistant for a number of terms. I enjoyed the teaching as well as the research. So I think the academic path was pretty much clear.
We're very close to a eureka moment at this point. That's because of the work you're doing with colleagues. Can you talk about the coming to the insight in the end that will mark your career, really?
So the work at MIT here was primarily algorithmic in character. So I was looking for efficient ways of doing things. And a lot of the work of a theoretician in computer science is precisely this, trying to determine which problems you can solve efficiently and find a good algorithm for them if you can, and which problems are hard intrinsically. So it's that separating that. And there's just hundreds of problems that you might want to look at. It turns out that you can say some of them are easy, some of them are hard, some of them you're not sure, but they're clearly the same in some sense. They're just recodings of the same problem. So that sifting out of these various problems was the bread and butter of what was going on in theoretical computer science at the time, trying to figure out which problems are easy on a computer, which problems are hard. And so that was part of what I was involved in, looking for good algorithms. And I was also thinking about things like P equals NP at the time, trying to prove that certain problems were hard. Well, I didn't have the tools at the time. In fact, that's still an open problem, very much so. So that drifted into working with a number of students on a variety of things, some of which involved things like one-way functions and some of the cryptographic things. I was working with a student by the name of Stephen Boyack, who was now at the NSA, on inverse matrix inverses, and when our matrix inverse is easier to work with than the matrix themselves and things like this. So there was lots of stuff in the air about complexity applied to computation, which problems are easy, which are hard. And then the eureka moment, as you said, arose when Stephen Boyack, who I just mentioned, gave me a paper from Diffie and Hellman, which said, new directions in cryptography. And that paper was really what changed my life in many ways. It said, here's a set of problems that we don't know how to solve, but which look like they could have theoretical interest and practical impact. And they're absolutely right. They said, this is a beautiful paper, nicely written, and said, here's the idea, the vision of a public key cryptographic system, and some ideas as to the kinds of things that relate to that and how that might be achieved. But they didn't have a working solution. And so that...
Why did we need a key system? Why
a public key system?
Yeah.
So the vision was that everybody could make up their own public keys and distribute them publicly without the need for a centralized approach. It's a little bit like the appeal that Bitcoin has today, where Bitcoin is a decentralized cryptocurrency without having a centralized issuing facility.
Right.
The public key vision is a bit like that, although, in fact, you need to have some support for authenticating public keys. If you give me your public key, how do I know it's really you that's giving it to me? And
right, of course.
So there's some of that aspect to it. But it was a decentralized flavor, and it really fit very well with the about-to-be-born e-commerce market, rather than the hierarchical sort of military situations that existed previously. So it was a different thing. And one of the things that I found most inspiring about the Diffie-Hellman paper was their discussion of digital signatures. So you can take a message and you can append something that comes from you. It's clearly from you. It can be verified as coming from you. It verifies that it's from you. It verifies that it's the content of that message was signed by you. So it's the electronic analog of a handwritten signature. And that was really novel. It wasn't just confidentiality. It was sort of authentication that was achieved there. And that I found to be an exciting notion as well. And it had, as it turns out, many more ramifications down the road as well.
So how do you dive into this? I mean, is there a particular problem you embrace?
So they said basically, you need to have inverse problems. You need to have something that's easy to do but hard to undo, right? So it's sort of a one-way function, the kind of thing I've been talking with Steve Boyack a little bit on there, and they gave some ideas for some ideas, but the world is open. You can take any kind of problem you like, and in fact, we're still looking at problems, trying to see which ones fit this model.
Right.
So you can take a problem which is hard to invert, basically, and turn it into a public key crypto system. With quantum and computing and things like that nowadays, the question is what's hard to compute may have changed. The ground rules may have changed. But in those days, we had conventional computers, classical computers. At the time, I was co-teaching a class on discrete mathematics, and we were talking about number theory at the time. So that was very much in my mind at the time. And so we were looking at approaches that a number theory can characterize. I say we. So I got Adi Shamir and Len Edelman involved soon on this project. I said, Adi and I'd love to talk with you guys about this suite of problems.
You bring the question to them.
I bring the question to them. So I had this paper. I said, this is an exciting paper. We should think about these questions. And I started with Adi, and Adi's always enthusiastic about new directions and new problems. So we started working with him, and then we brought Len into it. Adi and Len, interestingly enough, and given the context of the discussion we just had about math and computer science, Adi and Len were in the mathematics department here at MIT at the time. We had offices adjacent to each other here in the Lab for Computer Sciences, it was called. But, so I was a computer scientist, they were mathematicians. The laboratory was set up to be interdisciplinary. It really achieved that purpose at this point. We had mathematicians working together with computer scientists. In some sense, we would all say we're theoretical computer scientists.
Right.
Technically, we were in different departments at the time.
Now, there's no, of course, simple answer to this, but I'm going to ask the question too, because I'm interested also in just the process of collaboration.
Yeah.
How does it work in this context? I mean, it's the three of you that in the end came up with the direction that...
Yeah. No, collaboration as usual. I mean, collaboration, actually, it's interesting to talk about collaboration over the decades because, just to step back a bit and talk about it, one of the works I did at Stanford, as I mentioned earlier, was this fast median finding algorithm. There were 5 of us on the paper, and I remember the program committee saying, what is this? You can't all be co-authors. You're just trying to get travel money for the graduate students involved or something like this. And it really was co-authored in a collaborative way. But that was unusual then. Collaboration is nowadays much more a thing and much more common and routine than it was back then. At the time, Len and Adi and I started working together, 3 of us working together. That wasn't so uncommon, but it wasn't, single-authored papers were perhaps much more common then than they are now. So how do you work on a problem together? You sit down, you talk about it. What are the constraints? What do we know? What are the approaches? And we generated lots of ideas about, could we use number theory? Could we use some lattice-based kinds of things? Could we use some other kinds of things, other constructions that we come up with? There are lots of ideas about how you might try to do this. So we just sort of started generating ideas as to what might work, and mostly they didn't work.
This is a silly question, but it hits on a more important one, and that is obviously there's trust in the collaboration. I don't mean in terms of glory seeking, although that's a factor in human nature, but separate from that. Does somebody come up with an idea, and I'm simplifying it, of course, and the others say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard?
Well, nobody disparages ideas, of course, because you're always...
No, that's probably the wrong way to put it, but they're excited by that and will say, you may have something.
Cryptography is interesting because you don't know whether an idea is going to work or not. You just say, here's a construct, it looks, here's the way you would encrypt something, here's the way you would decrypt something, and then the key question is, can the adversary also decrypt without the knowledge of the private key?
Right.
And so that's a computational question which you may not know the answer to, and you may not. So even when we published the RSA paper, we didn't know whether it would ultimately be secure or not, because the key problems involved were open problems, and in fact, cryptography is very much like that. The difficulty for the adversary in breaking these schemes are generally open problems. They may be problems that have been studied for a while and look like they're hard, but you can't prove they're hard. We don't know how to prove problems are hard very well yet. So nobody says it's stupid or something. It says, no, here's a way that you can probably break it. You do this and that or something. So if it's breakable. And when Adi and Len and I had this, and you've probably heard this story before, but we had sort of different roles to play. Adi and I would come up with ideas more often, and Len would be the one to say, that's not going to work, guys. Here's a way to break it. So he was expert at breaking schemes that we had. So we went through a whole number of different ideas that Adi and I didn't know how to break, but Len saw how to take apart.
That helps me understand how you would work together. Also, I guess implicit in what you're saying is maybe one day with different stage of computational capacity and so on and on, what is now unbreakable may turn out to be breakable one day.
Yes, absolutely. I think things change. So back to the collaboration thing for a second. I mean, that's one of the lessons that was learned during World War II, apparently, was that in Germany, the cryptographers who were making codes and the cryptanalysts who were assessing their security and trying to break them were in different buildings and different camps, and they didn't communicate enough. And had they done so, they might have realized that their enigma was breakable. Wow. So I think we've learned today that it's very helpful to have people working both sides of the fence, working together to build codes. So anyway, that was, and then we're talking about, I got off track of that.
Well, we're really just developing the idea that will make the difference.
Yeah, so we had a number of different ideas that we looked at, and the thing that turned out to be RSA was not the first. It was, the 40th or something like that. And eventually, I think it was me that put the pieces together in the particular way that looked like RSA, but there were pieces that we'd all studied carefully in different frameworks. So put it together and say, this might work. So again, it was another proposal, one of 41 or something like that. And it could have fallen down like the others. It was nice and clean and simple, so it seemed like it had a nice structure to it. But it could have turned out to be another something for the dustbin if Len had seen a way to break that.
But you're developing confidence as a group that this is something worth testing.
Worth writing up. So worth writing up. Yeah, the way these things work is you have an idea in the field of cryptography these days. You publish it. And you say, we don't see how to break this. It seems like here's what we can figure out about its strength. It relates to these other computational problems like factoring or something like that. And you say, this is what we know, but it's an open problem to assess the security. Yes. Can you, as a community now, figure out
an invitation to people to tell you the limitations of it, if you will.
Yeah. And in fact, the process for coming up with new crypto systems has changed over the years to be one that's very much focused on standardization and a community effort. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology has done a marvelous job of running competitions for the submission of cryptographic algorithms and having community conferences and community efforts to try to break things. And so that's what's needed to really assess the strength of it. It's not, because we don't know how to prove things are hard. That's the problem with cryptography is we don't know, we don't have the technology. It's one of the big open problems in computer science. How do you show that a problem is really hard? Even though you got ideas on how to maybe do it fast, but it's if you can't show that it's going to, how's it hard? Why is it hard in the worst case? How do you, or how is it hard on the average? How do you?
This paper works. I mean, it actually is an answer that people have been looking for.
It seems to have worked well. Still stood the test of time. So the paper came out. It was a proposal at the time.
Yes.
We said, this is what we know. This is what we think we can do with this. It does seem to answer the question that Diffie and Hellman raised in their wonderful paper, New Directions Cryptography.
Right.
It answers it in the framework that they gave. And it really said, there are new things you can do in cryptography. So here's one that's an idea that's based on factoring that allows you to achieve a public key crypto system. Not only the encryption side, but also the digital signature side, which was a thing that I found particularly.
Did you hear from them, by the way?
We talked with them, and they were interested and appreciative and supportive. So
I need to get you now from this point, to what we've been talking about, the realization that this might actually be a solution, to the implementation and the effect on the field.
Yeah, so it was the implementation issues were interesting because at the time computers were slow. They were very much slower than we had today. I mean, they're 10,000 times slower or something like that. And so the process of finding prime numbers, even, which is an essential part of the RSA thing, where you multiply two large prime numbers together. Finding those prime numbers could take a half an hour on a computer or something like this. It was enormous, and that was numbers that are considered short by today's standards. So. Those have changed over time with Moore's law and computers getting faster. But at the time, the implementation was actually a serious issue. This was a proposal that, in some sense, it was feasible because the algorithms involved were all polynomial time. But if you look at how much time was actually required by those polynomials, it took too much time to be really of practical interest yet. That would soon change as computers got faster. One of the things we did early on was to get interested in chip design. So MIT at the time was in the process of building up a capability in VLSI fabrication. So designing and implementing large-scale chips to do computations of various sorts. So we actually put time in about 1980 to design and implement a prototype for a chip that would do the RSA computation, would find the large prime numbers, it would do the encryption and so on too. With special purpose circuitry like that, you could actually make it very feasible. In the end, those special purpose chips aren't needed so much because the chips are pretty fast now.
But it did the job. I mean,
it demonstrated feasibility at the time. And it was also an interesting, just intellectual experience for us to say, how do you design a circuit chip, a chip to do something like this?
I'm going to get really practical here and ask about the economic implications of this, because they feel and have proven profound in terms of your even patenting this concept and perhaps presiding over in the private as well as the public world its implementation. How do you think about that at this point?
So at the time, we didn't know much about startups. The culture of computer science departments has changed hugely since then. At the time, there were a few startups, but not many. If you try to find colleagues who had done startups or things like that, it's not like Stanford where everybody's out of their office off doing their startups today or something. But we said, this looks interesting. It looks usable. And MIT was supportive of efforts like this. So they said, well, sure, we'll patent it. And then we said, well, we'll set up a little startup company to see if there might be some applications. And there were applications sketched in the New Directions paper, and we were thinking of some too. But mind you, the World Wide Web had not yet been invented. And so all of the applications that flow out of that were still in the future. And during the 80s, when the company was trying to get going, it was all very difficult because there were no large-scale applications like you would get by having Amazon sales or something like that, or e-commerce in general. So from the time that we invented the system through the 80s, up until the invention of the World Wide Web, it was pretty much a barren market. Markets had to be created. When the web happened, things changed like that. It was an amazing transformation. all of a sudden, everybody was using computers and the web to do commerce. Transactions had to be verified. They wanted to be encrypted often. You wanted to authenticate things. You needed digital signatures. So things changed remarkably with the invention of the web. If you read David Kahn's book about the history of cryptography, he talks about one of the large impetuses to cryptography earlier, which was the invention of radio. And during World War I, radio was used for commanders to talk to their ships at sea and things like this too. But everything was broadcast so that people could listen in. You had to have cryptography. So the invention of radio was a first impetus for cryptography. The World Wide Web is really the second. It's sort of the same kind of
Very
thing.
interesting.
Yeah, it's a nice parallel.
So a short layman's version of this is you didn't own the rights at a point where it was paying off in a big way.
Right.
And you lose the rights in the natural course of a patent.
Right, the patent expired in 2000 or something like that. So
It's going to allow me to introduce a very important thing in your life, which is even the ethics of this. Much of your approach in general anyway has been let 1,000 flowers bloom, let as many people into the use of this as I can. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think for this particular scheme, we founded a company, and there was a patent, because I think that's the only way to get the energy and the investments and the focus to get that out there. But then again, the goal was to market that, as you say, let 1,000 applications bloom.
Yes.
So with the support of this company and the software provided by this company, you can have lots of applications using it. It wasn't trying to be restrictive, it was trying to get things out there.
I really want to belabor, because we don't have a lot of time, belabor is not the right word, the ethical questions that come into a researcher's life, your kind of research. I guess part of that is the whole question of who has access to, who can use it, but also in the course of your life, you've come up with ideas that you've deliberately not taken possession of, so to speak, that you've wanted used and make decisions that allow it to have the widest use. Can you talk about that? Because it is ethical, the question of
So I think the ethics of cryptography are very interesting.
Okay.
Mostly the community runs in an open manner, like you're talking about, where people publish designs and so on too. Occasionally, they will patent them and so on too. But I think that the effort in cryptography these days has been pretty much through the standardization route. People won't use cryptography unless they're standardized, and so that's the route that people take now, and that's the recommended path. If you want a cryptographic algorithm, you look for the U.S. national standards. You say, what are the algorithms are published? That said, back to the ethical issues of cryptography. Yes. One of the big issues then and even now is government access to encrypted data.
Yes.
And so I've been involved with that debate since the early days. In the 90s, the government tried to encourage everybody to use a certain encryption chip, which would not only encrypt the data, but also allow them access to the plain text, right?
Right.
And that didn't go well, and I was happy to be on the side to encourage that it not be adopted. And today we see the U.S. government pushing for access to iPhones, whereas Apple and Facebook are saying, this, if you try to put backdoors into these phones, you will weaken the overall infrastructure, be worse for security overall. The benefits you get aren't equal to the losses that you will suffer. And so the ethics of cryptography, these are important policy issues. They deserve debate.
They're profound.
But I think to my taste, the answers are pretty clear that we need good technology. We need good strength, particularly with foreign state actors attacking us left and right, not only in encryption space, but election space and so on, too. Having good technology to protect us without the backdoors built in is where we want to be.
The last question I'll ask, because there's so much in your career we could talk about, but you've tried to contribute to voting questions as well in ethical perspective. Can you just end the conversation with a little bit about that?
So I think I've drifted in the direction of looking for questions where technology comes to play and policy is relevant. So this encryption debate is one of the areas. Elections are another one where technology is coming out. We can see how to protect elections better than we used to know how to be able to do. Things like risk limiting audits, and the use of cryptography turn out to be powerful tools for securing elections.
Yes.
We'd like to see more of that. And that involves not only technology, but also policy, because people have to understand, adopt, and implement these kinds of things. As you see in the books here on the table, I guess I'm attracted to areas where there's interesting policy questions. Climate change being the latest area that I've been looking at. And it's not,
are you getting a response? I guess with the distinction of what you've achieved, people do tend to listen a bit to what you have to say. So are you encouraged by?
I think it helps. I mean, there's a lot of pushback on the part of the fossil fuel industry and so on too, saying, this is a hoax or whatever. But I think that by and large, the science is winning this debate. And so I'm happy to participate in this.
Science is winning this debate is a great way to end. Thank you very much.
Happy to talk with you.